Okay, let's start.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are having one of our pre-webinars of the Fulbright Case Group. Our lecturer today is Mariano Tursi. Mariano is a Fulbright alumni. He had the Fulbright scholarship in 2005. He studied at the Johns Hopkins University, where he completed his MA and his PhD programs. And currently he is the research director at the Universidad Católica Argentina. And he has recently published a book. I don't remember the name. The name of his book is The International Politics of the Superheroes, that was published this year in the US. So Mariano, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you very much, Laura. First I want to thank everyone at the Fulbright Commission. Norma, thank you very much for this invitation, but also Laura, Melina, Marisa, thank you very much. It's good to be back. It's good to be home. So thank you very much. Second, congratulations to everyone. You're about to embark in a great experience. Probably everyone has told you this, but I'm living proof of that. I don't want to tell you that. I want to show you that. So it's going to be great in so many levels that we can hardly imagine. What I'm going to be talking about today, and I would like you to ask every question or comment or disagreement, it's about a very complex and difficult topic that I will try to make as simple and as interesting as possible, which is Argentine politics and economics. Let me begin with something that is commonplace among economists, which is that there are four kinds of countries in the world, right? Developed countries, developing countries, Japan that has no resources and is a developed country, and Argentina that has everything and cannot develop. And that probably it's a starting point, a humorous starting point, it's very important. You are going to be coming to a country which has various levels that we are going to start. The first level that I want you to know is the self-perception level. This is a joke that it's told repeatedly in Argentina, and it has a problem. And the problem is us. Why? Because you will see in Argentina that it is very difficult to find an objective data-based opinion, right? Or at least an approximation to reality. You're going to find Argentines that believe their country is great with no basis whatsoever and no comparison on economic data. And you're going to see a lot of Argentines that are going to speak very badly about the political and economic situation, again, with no basis, right? So this is very important because everything that you can read, especially in the newspapers, it's going to be even more confusing to you. I studied my MA in Washington, D.C. because as Laura said, I went to Johns Hopkins, but not to the Baltimore campus. I went to SAIS, the School of International Studies, which is in Washington. And I always begin my talks to Fulbright, especially US Fulbright people, with an anecdote. When I received people in DC because coming from Argentina, people take a flight to Miami, to Washington, or to New York, right? And so when people came to DC, I would show them around our nation's capital, as I learned, and I went to the mall with them. And I showed them the Washington Monument, right? And every Argentine that came, it said, this is exactly like the obelisco, right? The obelisco you will see, you will walk, is there. It's an obelisk, of course, and is there in Corrientes and 9 de Julio, which is the theater district. And this is one of the first things that I want to convey to you. Comparisons are tremendously deceiving. Why? Because what the Washington Monument represents for Amanda, for Sherry, for Terry, for Tess, for Patty, or for Monica, for you, for LRM, I'm sorry, but I see that, I cannot say the name, it's completely different to what the obelisco represents to Melina, to Laura, to Marisa, to Norma, and to me, right? The first one is a reminder of patriotism and a fight for independence. The second one, the one you'll see in Buenos Aires, has more of a cultural value than a patriotic value, right? It's a point of pride of Buenos Aires rather than the rest of the country. And it's really interesting. If I ask you now, what images do you associate with Argentina? You can unmute or type it in the chat.
Beef.
Beef. Okay. Liliana says beef. Tango, Terry. Amazingly interesting. And this is what happens. Malbec. Okay, Monica talks about Malbec. Except for Monica, the images that Argentina conjures are the images of the city of Buenos Aires and the surroundings of Buenos Aires. Beef is not produced in Mendoza, where Malbec is from. Tango, it's a musical expression from the city of Buenos Aires, and not even an autochthonous one, because tango is the result of the many nationalities that were living together in the city of Buenos Aires, right? So this is really important to know, right? The first thing that I want you to know is this, the self-perception that Argentina has, Argentines have of their own. The 95% of the people that you will encounter are going to be from Buenos Aires, speaking in Buenos Aires, with a Buenos Aires perspective. In that, you have a great leadership example in Norma, for example. Norma knows realities from all over the country. So it's not that she's going to be speaking, even when she speaks from Buenos Aires, she has a broader perspective on issues, right? And this is very important because your political views from people you will find, from hailing a cab to a meeting that you will have at the embassy, they're going to be talking about issues that happen in Buenos Aires. And Argentina is not Buenos Aires. And even Buenos Aires, it's going to be completely different. If you go to Recoleta, which you're going to be traveling to, and you're going to be there, you have the highest GDP per capita. And if you cross Libertador Avenue, you have Villa 31, the poorest neighborhood in the city of Buenos Aires. So those contrasts are also important for you to be aware of. Again, these inequalities are built in, and I'm going to be talking about that. This that is just a cultural aspect has a political and an economic contrast. The economic is the inequality. The political is that the Villa 31 is there to balance out the Recoleta votes, right? I'm going to go into the political system in a while. So first of all, self-perceptions. Remember that when you travel, when you come here, you can have different experiences. The most superficial experience that you can have is the one of a tourist, right? That they will pack you into a bus and you will take a picture with what you believe it's more picturesque. But you're not going to be tourists here. You're going to be travelers. And many of you are going to be like researchers, right? In an anthropological way, you're going to be here. This is the way I approached my Fulbright stay in the US, right? I never ate dulce de leche. I never missed Argentina. I avoided Argentines in the US as the pest because I didn't want to be there as an Argentine. I wanted to be as immersed as possible, right? I had the fortune, and again, this is not a partisan comment at all, but I had the fortune of experiencing the Obama election, right? And it was really interesting to be in Shaw, in that district that after Dr. King was murdered, was burned to the ground, was at Ben's Chili Bowl there. And I tried to make as much as an anthropological experience to me as possible. And I encourage you to do the same thing for you, right? we love beef. I don't remember who said beef, but we do love beef, Liliana, but we don't always eat beef. We also eat pizza, right? It's much more of a commonplace to have pizza. And this is part of what you will experience too. But let's go first into economics and politics, and then into politics probably, right? We could start this story in various times. I'm going to take 3 snapshots, like movies. Yeah, I know that you have a film chat later. So, like movies, when you have one snapshot of one time and then a second, I'm going to talk about 3 snapshots, right? First snapshot is the colonial era. Second snapshot is going to be Peronism. And the third snapshot is going to be current day affairs, right? As I tell everyone, please, 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 do not believe that this talk is the one or the only or the best opinion. It is just one opinion. For those of us who are in social sciences, we know that our object of study is different from the natural sciences. If I drop my phone now, the phone is going to drop to the ground because there's a force called the force of gravity, which is independent from me. But if I view the Cuban Revolution and I'm a communist, I'm going to see a completely different thing as if I'm a libertarian, right? So in social studies, we have this inherent bias that nobody can avoid. I completely urge you to make the most of the impunity of being foreigners, to push your Argentine interlocutors to speak about their political views. Unlike me, that I would get stoned to death, you are going to get talked to death. Argentines love talking about politics, and every Argentine is going to give you the definitive, absolute, correct opinion, right? And they all have an idea of why the country works or doesn't work. And they always have someone to blame. Cristina Kirchner, Peron, Messi, the Fulbright, no, not the Fulbright Commission. So everyone's going to tell you who is responsible for the success or the failure. And in balancing out the many views, you're going to learn a lot, right? This is very interesting, an exercise that you can do. So if we have time, I put this exercise in practice in the US. So when I did this question, when Obama was elected, I did this question to my white friends. I asked if they are not voting for Obama because he was Black. And that was totally surprising for them, that question, right? And the same thing for my African-American acquaintances. I asked them, are you voting for Obama because he's African-American, right? And that kind of naivete makes them think from zero again. And it's very interesting that you do this. First snapshot, colonial times. Why it's important to have this snapshot? Because colonial times marked Argentina's politics and economics. As you know, and as Laura mentioned, I did political economy as my specialization. So I understand economic phenomena to be inextricably tied to political structures and vice versa, right? So whenever I speak about the two phenomena in tandem, the two dimensions in tandem. What can we learn from colonial times that it's alive today? I want to unearth the roots of how Argentina works today. During colonial times, the Spanish crown forbade the colonies to trade among themselves. You come from a colonial past yourselves. But the British crown allowed the colonies to trade among themselves. Even today, studies show that former Spanish colonies have less economic performance than former British colonies, because that institutional structure generated something that in the literature we call path dependence. Also, all the economic structure that was imposed in Spanish Latin America in general and in Argentina in particular was tied to making this work for the metropole, not for local development, right? The northern part of Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, and even Colombia, they were for getting minerals out, right? Silver mostly, gold afterwards. And this is very important because it precluded development, something that we still deal with today. If you see the railway network in the US, it's like a chessboard, right? It goes from the east to the west and from the south to the north, more from the east to the west, as it accompanied development in the US. In Argentina, it's like a funnel that comes from the agro provinces and finishes in Buenos Aires, because that development was meant for getting products out, right? Not for connecting the country. If you want, whoever, I don't remember who answered Malbec, if you want to take a flight from Mendoza to try the Mendoza Malbec to the northern province in Salta to try the Salta wines, you're going to go through Buenos Aires or through Cordoba, right? But mostly through Buenos Aires, even today. So that colonial past is very much alive. A second example of the colonial past is that the Spanish crown allowed trade to be regulated by something that was called representation houses, right? You couldn't trade freely. You needed to have authorization from the Spanish crown. That path dependence is exactly the same as to buy foreign currency today. You're going to experience, I don't want to tread on dangerous ground here, but you're going to realize that there are different exchange rates. One of the big mistakes my friends in the US did when they came here is that they brought their credit cards. And so I would get dollars here. And the return on that dollar is much lower than if they sell them, because there is a parallel illegal market, right? Why? Because the structure of regulation of economics, of markets, of capitalism, it's very much ingrained. This is why people who ascribe excessive regulation to the current government are completely mistaken. It's not that this government is a monster that wants to capture every resource available. They may very well be, but I don't care about that, because governments from different political signs before and after typically gravitate to this in different degrees. That's correct, but it's something that has historically plagued Argentina's economic development. So the first snapshot, the colonial snapshot, helps us understand very much the relation between political power and economic development, right? This is very important because we see it very much alive today. The system to buy dollars or to liquidate dollars, it becomes completely baroque. For individuals, that they have to go to exchange houses and they cannot do it directly in banks or clear it simply, to companies that they need to find partners to liquidate their assets in pesos, to buy dollars, and to send those earnings to their matrices and their home offices abroad. So it encourages evasion, and this is something that is manifest in taxes. Some people believe, I always was fascinated by the saying that you have in the US, death and taxes. This was epitomized in Joe Black, the movie with Brad Pitt, death and taxes as the two unavoidable things in life. No one in Argentina will think of taxes as an avoidable thing. I'd much rather cheat death. It's really interesting because we actually have a saying that it will be recovered by someone in the second snapshot in Peronism, that the saying goes, to my friends, everything, to my enemies, the law. The law is not an instrument here to equalize individuals into a society. Law here is the way in which power maintains and reproduces its dominion. Even if it destroys the market, even if it destroys opportunities, economic opportunities for value creation, all of this doesn't work, right? Just to give you a recent example, and I'm going from the first snapshot to the third. When Uber came here, when Cabify came here, these car sharing apps, The city of Buenos Aires was paralyzed by taxis. All taxis stopped in the main arteries just to blockade the city, right? And this is very important because it's the defense of privilege against the destruction of those old structures by technology or by a new idea. It's just to give you an idea, it's as unthinkable as if Kodak, remember Kodak with its cameras and everything, would prevent servers from loading Instagram because it threatens their own business. So really important. Or if airlines would prevent online ticketing sites from selling, and you would only have to go to a travel agency, right? So this is something that you are going to have to deal with, right? Last Thursday, I was stopped completely in traffic because of a big demonstration at Retiro, at the train station. And you're going to have to see this, and it's going to be, for you, it's going to be a marvelous experience, right? Taken, of course, with care and with personal security, but this is part of the first snapshot, right? The problem of political structures and institutions and economic. Second snapshot, Peronism. You're going to be learning, as you'll see, you're going to be learning data, and you're going to be learning dates, and you're going to be learning names. But Peron, Juan Domingo Peron, was the most important president of Argentine history. Again, if I say this to my Argentine audience, everyone would go, you're a Peronist. No, I'm not a Peronist. So you're anti-Peronist. No, I'm not anti-Peronist. But Juan Domingo Peron undoubtedly marked the political and economic structure in Argentina. He was president in the mid-1940s for one presidency, and then his second presidency was interrupted, right? He had a coup d'etat that his enemies called the Liberation Revolution. After that, he was exiled, and he came back in the 70s. And Peron died, not his peak popularity was in the 1940s, right? 1946 to 1952. That was his peak popularity. But he died in the 1970s, late 1970s. I think it was 1978. No, I'm sorry, 1974. So I was confused with the World Cup, which was also important. So 1974, Peron, and please take this as a nugget of very important. Peron is the figure that today structures political alignments between those who follow him and those who are anti him. It's as if in the US, today, politics would evolve around the Nixonian, anti-Nixonian axis. This is completely unthinkable in the US, right? Completely unthinkable. The closest that you will get to such an impact if Trump comes back, right? If Trump would have had a second presidency, he would have been as divisive as this that I'm mentioning, right? Some people love Peron, some people hate Peron. This tells us the first piece of information of the second snapshot, which is Argentine politics is built around pros and cons. Peron, anti-Peron. Peronista, anti-Peronista, right? It's not about Peronista, non-Peronista. It's anti-Peronista, which created a lot of political violence in Argentina, right? Which was from the 1940s till the 1970s. For most of you who don't know, the military dictatorship in Argentina did not disappear mostly communists. Of course, this was a very criminal regime, but it persecuted leftist Peronists, right? This is going to be very important for the third snapshot, which is current day. So, Peron, what did Peron do? In the 1940s, he tried to remake the society. This was something that you experienced also in the US under FDR, in Italy under Mussolini, in Germany, we all know, in Spain under Franco, and in Latin America, this happened under Lázaro Cárdenas in Mexico, under Getulio Vargas in Brazil. I'm mentioning these cases just to realize that Argentina, the one thing that I won't like you to take from this class is that Argentina's politics or economics are some sort of virus that Argentines have, or some sort of DNA or psychological structure that Argentines have. This is a result of economic and political factors. This is not about culture. It's about economic and political determinants. So what Peron did is something very similar to what Hugo Chavez did in Venezuela. You might like it, you might not like it, but he incorporated all of the working class that was left behind, underrepresented or non-represented, from the tremendously high development and industrialization process that Argentina experienced from the 1880s to the 1920s, right? In Argentina, capitalism arrived, development arrived, railways, urbanization, and all of this created a proletariat, right? A working class. And those were economic actors with no political representation. Hugo Chavez did the same thing in Venezuela. He incorporated those masses that were outside of the political system. How? Through a cooptation mechanism, right? He put them into unions. Those unions had political alignment with Peronism. And there you have the structure of Argentine economics, which was called ISI, Import Substituting Industrialization. It works in a very simple way. You foster national champions and you protect them from outside competition. Those national champions produce with national workforce that is unionized, and those unions vote for the arbiter between capital and labor, that is the state. It's a very simple system that it works for a full employment society at the expense of the consumer, because it kills competition. So it creates a closed economy. Though the inefficiencies in prices that arise from this closed economy, non-competitive economy, typically explode in what it's called a boom and bust cycle, right? And therein you have the serpent's egg of Argentina's recurrent crisis, right? We cannot balance out the needs of labor and capital. And the political coalition that represents labor and the one that represents capital cannot agree in a self-reinforcing mechanism. So what happens is that politics goes into a polarization, a constant polarization. And every election, we discuss the basis of everything. The basis of economics, the basis of society, the main issue, and probably you will be here for 2023, right? You're going to see, or at least you're going to be enough to see the campaign pick up in 2022. And you're going to see that the discussion here is not about policy, it's about politics. It's not about corrective measures on a course. It's about the course itself. It's about the nature of the ship. So every election, everything is up for grabs. The number of Supreme Court justices, the nature of the judiciary, parliamentary, and executive branches, right? Capitalism, Argentine's relation to the world. This is a government, and I'm transitioning into the third snapshot. This is a government that is aligned internationally to countries like China, like Russia. The prior government wanted to be aligned to the US, to Great Britain, to Europe. So there is no middle ground. And in that swings, you lose the baby with the bathwater, right? And this is why we go into cycles of indebtedness and rejecting that indebtedness. The Macri government comes in, they get a great assistance package from the IMF. The next government was like unsure about rejecting all payments or not, right? So this happens, and Peronism, it's the main articulation of Argentine politics. To me, it's absolutely sad and pathetic that our country is between pro or anti, right? We lose out a lot. I always speak to my anti-Peronist friends and I tell them, can you be a little bit more proactive? Instead of being anti-something, can you stand for something instead of rejecting everything? Because I don't see it as a good basis for organizing society. And probably you'll have some speaker at some point that's going to be tremendously anti-Peronist. And it's going to try to sell you on the idea that Peronism is the evil that explains all underdevelopment in this country. That's completely false. Analytically, not politically. I'm not a Peronist or an anti-Peronist. I don't believe in those, Manichaean descriptions of politics, right? Also, something that is a big characteristic that you will find here in Argentina. Argentina is not Mexico, it's not Peru, it's not Bolivia, it's not Chile because of Peronism. What do I mean by this? Everyone in Argentina is the same. Everyone. If I explain to you with the same level of certainty, and I have a BA, an MA, and a PhD under my belt in those issues, I have nothing to say with a cabbie, with a cab driver. The cab driver is going to explain Argentine politics and economics with the same level of certainty as the most encumbered political scientist, right? And this is something that was brought in by Peronism, this equalizing force, right? Well, of course, a tsunami is also an equalizing force, but it destroys all buildings, right? So I'm just telling you what happened. I'm not saying, I'm not celebrating, I'm not decrying. I'm just stating the facts as they happen, right? The cycle of political violence in Argentina was closed in the 1980s, right? But from 1982, from the 1940s and also before, right? Political violence in Argentina was commonplace, even from the times of the Colonia, right? You see, Facundo Quiroga was murdered by a couple of gunmen, the Reina Fe brothers, right? You're going to see very close to the Fulbright office, there's a place called Plaza Lavalle. Plaza Lavalle, in the middle of Plaza Lavalle, you have a statue of Manuel Dorrego, who was the guy who actually fired upon Lavalle. When you go to Palermo, very close to what was the zoo and very close to the ambassador's residence, you will see in the gardens of Palermo, there's a statue of Sarmiento. That statue is placed exactly where the Rosas mansion was. It's placed in the place, Rosas was his mortal enemy. And they put the statue of Sarmiento in the place where Rosas has his study, very close to the Japanese gardens, right? So this part of violence this chapter of violence was closed in the 1980s. Violence, not animosity. Animosity is very much alive. And this opens the door for the third and final snapshot. Current day. Current day politics is marked by the Kirchnerismo, anti-Kirchnerismo stand. Unfortunately for you, newcomers to Argentine politics, anti-Kirchnerismo happens inside Kirchnerismo as well, right? You are going to see a very interesting, Biden-Harris is the formula that you have. We have another formula, which is Fernández-Fernández, right? Our president is Alberto Fernández. Our vice president is Cristina Fernández. Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, but she goes now by Cristina Fernández sometimes when it's politically better for her to distance from Kirchnerismo, and by Fernández de Kirchner when Kirchnerismo is an asset. The problem, unlike the Biden-Harris combo, is that for a while now, for me, it was obvious, but Cristina Fernández is undermining President Fernández, right? Why? Because that government, that coalition government has exploded, has imploded. Some people still don't realize, and they are looking like if they were an ostrich with their head in the ground. But the reality is that the ruling coalition in this country does not exist anymore. So what we have now, it's a divided government from within and the opposition. What you are going to be facing when you come in, and again, I urge you to come because you have something that is very important. You have a return ticket, which is wonderful, right? Unlike many of us, you have a return ticket to go back to the US. But what we are experiencing is an acceleration of inflation because there is no economic command of the country right now. Why? Because there is a tie of forces right now within the ruling coalition. The fact that the differences are increasingly bringing the coalition apart, it's wreaking havoc on economic policy making and economic policy decisions. As I told you, the more intense the political conflict, the shorter the economic time horizon. And when you have that, you realize that economic policy is done for the day. If you ask anyone in Argentina, economic planning, historically, but now is the case, does not go over 3 months. Argentina doesn't have plans for more than a quarter, has ideas for more than a quarter, but not plans. Because we cannot anticipate. If you don't believe me, just poll on the value of the dollar against the peso by the time you arrive. And you're going to see that it's going to change, right? Right now, it's around 200 pesos a dollar. But we don't know because inflation has a logic of its own sometimes. So what is the nature of politics today? You have a ruling coalition by Kirchnerismo, the heirs of popular Peronismo. And again, I'm leaving out lots of critical junctures in Argentina history. Military dictatorship, War of Malvinas, democratization, 2001 crisis. But we only have that time, and I'd rather give you a structural view of things that then you can pull to analyze those issues. This ruling coalition is the heir of 2001. This is not Peronismo pure. What's the inflation now, Liliana? It's around 4.5 monthly. Last year, we closed inflation, annual inflation for 2021 was 53.4. Again, economists tend to say these things, 53.4. Let me put it this way. Inflation it slashed your salary by half. Whatever you earned in purchasing power by March, half of that was gone by December. That's a big problem because it gives rise to something that it's called the wage price spiral. Let me put it this way. There is a 53% inflation, right? So Melina goes to Norma and she said, Norma, 53% inflation, we need to adjust my salary. And Norma says, okay, I'll give you 40% rise, right? So Melina now has 40% more in nominal terms. She was earning 100, now she's earning 140. But what happens? Let's say that Norma is the head of a company and she sells alfajores, which is a delicacy that you will find irresistible here. So Norma says, now I earned 200 pesos and I have to spend 40 more on Melina. So I'll jack up the price of alfajores to Laura and to Marisa. And of course, it's a never-ending wheel, because now if Melina wants to go and buy an alfajor, all her increase in salary, it's gone by the increase in price of the alfajor. All the while, inflation keeps scaling up. And the more inflation scales up, the more people think it's going to scale up. And so they plan accordingly, which triggers another round of inflation. I always ask this to any Argentine. What would you rather have, $1 or its equivalent in pesos? We would all take $1. Let's say that the exchange rate is 200 to 1. We'd rather take $1 than the 200 pesos. 210 pesos, maybe. But that's us anticipating future inflation. So the actual value of the dollar is 210, not 200, right? Because inflation is forward-looking. Is it declare an economic crisis? There is a law, Liliana, there's a law that it's called economic crisis, but that law is not to tackle the gravity of the economic situation, but rather to empower the president to do whatever he wants. Whenever you see the word crisis, it means that politicians are asking you to give them carte blanche to do whatever they want. Remember, of course, Liliana, that most of us alive, we have memory of 1989, in which we had hyperinflation, 3-digit inflation. So we Argentines have a higher threshold of inflation. When I speak to my European colleagues and I tell them that we have 50% inflation, they think that we're on the verge of civil war. And it is amazing that we have been already, I think we're on the 10th year of a 30+% inflation on average. On average is 35–40% inflation. And there is no social unrest compared to the situation of 2-digit inflation. That's why I'm mentioning this. So it is very important that you understand those issues because you would come to a country, and again, this is great for foreigners sometimes because they come with, if you have foreign exchange here, you have a different, the value for your money, it's higher. This has to be compensated because prices go up. It's not just exchange rate, but inflation. So this is to be understood. What about the opposition, which is part of this snapshot? The opposition is also in a situation of flux in which they have to decide their leadership for 2023 elections. But they're also divided and atomized. So we're moving into a very combustible scenario in which the ruling coalition is splitting and they cannot agree on a leadership, and the opposition is going through the same thing. In terms of incentives, this is very toxic because the worse the economic environment gets, the better for those aiming to get to power, because they can present themselves as the solution. And the graver the crisis, the more the electorate is willing to sacrifice, right? Let me give you an example. When we had a public health crisis, we all sacrificed our freedom of movement and we stayed home. Of course, in part, we all believed that it was the best way to tackle a pandemic. But then again, we stayed home because the politicians told us to, right? Because those of you in countries, particularly the US, in which politicians told you, don't worry, you'll be fine. You just went about your normal lives. The same thing would have happened to us if our president would have told us, that's fine, right? So this is very important. One dynamic is the medical dynamic of how to prevent or deal with a public health crisis. The other thing is the political interest behind that. And this happens with every aspect, right? It's every aspect of politics and economics. So what about the opposition? Well, the most important political figure in the opposition currently is the mayor of the city of Buenos Aires, Horacio Rodríguez Larreta. We do not know if former President Macri is going to compete in the next elections, and there are a couple of other figures within that party and in other parties. You'll hear these names, Patricia Bullrich within this party, and Javier Milei, which is a libertarian, a far-right libertarian that kind of in a Trump style, a wild card that has been making strong inroads in the electoral arena. On the other side, we don't know if the president is going to run for re-election. What I know is that there is a chance, I'm not saying this is going to happen, that the vice president is going to run for president as well, at least in the primaries, right? So we could really have a blast from the past and have in the primaries 2 former presidents competing, each in their own primary. And again, this is something that it's really interesting. And I'll end on this note, going back to the first snapshot. I always found really interesting 2 political figures from around the same time, George Washington and Simón Bolívar. When George Washington finished his presidency, he was probably the most powerful ever president in the US. He had all legitimacies possible, right? He had won the war. He had built the country from scratch, let's say. And what did Washington do after his term of as president? Anyone knows? Yes, Terry.
I think he became a farmer.
Yes, exactly. He retired to a beautiful estate
Yeah.
that every one of us can visit. I did at Mount Vernon, very close to Washington. When I was there, I couldn't believe it, right? It was like a scene from Little House on the Prairie, right? I mean, with a little bit more money, but I mean, yeah, he was a slave owner and everything, but I mean, he retired to a pastoral end, right? Where is President George W. Bush now? Where is Obama now, right? They're not scheming between the shadows. They're not in power like our president, big vice president. That's my Freudian slip there. So what did Simón Bolívar do? Simón Bolívar died clinging to power. Latin American leaders tend to die holding on to power. Lula is coming back in Brazil. And why? Because of political reasons. Because if you leave power, the faction that comes after you will try to destroy you, right? And this is the self-perpetuating cycle. I found always this, until President Trump, I always found former presidents in the US conviviality admiring, right? The fact that at some point, President Carter, Reagan died, but you know, you could see President Carter, President Bush, then you saw President Clinton, Bush, and Obama, former presidents, and they go into a sort of political heaven, you know, in which they become wise men. They are beyond politics because you already had the top political office possible. We don't have that here. Peron came back twice and he died in office. I was telling you about Simón Bolívar, you know, that he always wanted more. Cristina Kirchner is an example, and Mauricio Macri too. This is why I end up, everyone hates me because I slap on the right and on the left. But you know, the fact that President Macri wants to come back and the fact that Cristina Kirchner came back speaks awfully of our political system, because it's not good to curb personal ambitions. And by the way, I think no one in the right mind would deny that Cristina Kirchner is in office only because she's being persecuted by law. If tomorrow all of her investigations were cleared, she would have no incentive. Of course, if that was the case, she would be the most powerful person in Argentina and she would have all the incentives to rule forever. So it's really important that you understand these 2 figures on how politics works. Politics in the US work in a bipartisan centripetal way. In Argentina, in a multi-party centrifugal way. Institutions in the US were created by the Federalists, Madison, Hamilton, Jay, to curb personal ambition and power. Institutions in Argentina are there to give sway to personal ambitions to power. So completely different systems of politics and completely different results on economics. I'll stop here and I'll hear any questions or comments or disagreements that you might have.
Anybody wants to ask questions? It was an excellent talk, Mariano. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Norma. Thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Questions?
I have so many questions, but I'm thinking of a lot of the articles that we read. I noticed there's different ideas that are represented about cultural things such as racism and some other like kind of big topics where it seemed to be opinions that were really varying. And so when you were talking about that in this subject area of politics and economics, it just makes me wonder if we'll ever really figure out.
If it makes for any consolation, we have not figured it out yet. I always was surprised because when I argued in the US, I found a phrase to be very commonplace between two people, which is, I don't agree with that, right? If Norma and I are having a disagreement, she would say to me in the US, I don't quite agree with that. But here in Argentina, not her, but someone would say to me, no, you're just stupid.
Oh.
Right? It's una boludez. Right? And so it speaks a lot at how there's a canceling way of talking about issues. It's very difficult to talk to people. I do this exercise just to pester people. Norma knows this. When I know that someone is anti-Kirchnerista, I just say, I drop this comment. I say, I believe Cristina Kirchner is such an elegant woman. They go ballistic. They automatically start ranting against me and against her, of course. You know, I'm just talking about something completely frivolous and trivial, right? The same thing for the other side, right? Whenever I say, did you notice that everyone thought that Macri would rule for the rich, but he didn't because he was a businessman, which is actually true. I mean, there are no, personally, I think he ruled badly for everyone. But he didn't rule particularly for the business. And I was anti-Macri, well, he did everything wrong. And so there's no learning in politics. There's very little space for compromise.
Unfortunately, in the United States, I feel like politically we're getting to be a little more of that black and white. And
yes, the closest that you've ever got to an Argentine leader was President Trump. President Trump received people in the Oval Office with something that no other president had, which is the notion that public and private property were the same. President Trump was not receiving people in the White House as a tenant of a public space. He was at Mar-a-Lago, but in DC. We know this style, we know it very well. Trump was the first person that actually went into the Trump killed one of my classes. One of my classes here, when I teach Argentine politics, I always say that, I used to say that you would never see a US president at a balcony, like in Casa Rosada, here, presidents go out in the balcony and they speak to the crowds. And I would use this example, and it was fantastic until Trump. Trump opened up the balcony in the lawn, facing the lawn, and he received a mob, let's put it that way, because that's what it was. Any other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. No? Okay. So hopefully you'll have a great trip. I mean, you're in great hands from everyone at the Fulbright Commission. Thank you very much, Norma. Thank you very much, Melina, Marisa, Laura. Thank you very much to everyone. It's been great. I really enjoyed it. In the future, if you need anything, you just ask anyone at the commission and I'm an email away. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariano. And We will invite you to meet them in person when they are here in July to some Fulbright event. So they'll have a chance to talk to you personally.
Thank you. I will gladly attend. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Good luck. Bye.
Now,